Now, we're in Matthew 6. Matthew 6, so if you have your Bibles, go to Matthew 6. If you do not have a Bible, we got you covered. Just raise your hand, and one of these guys right here will hook you up, and then go to Matthew 6. We're going to be looking at verses 5 through 8 as we continue in this series. Ken last week was talking about really the hypocrisy that was happening with giving. And this week we're going to talk about what was going on with praying. And so Jesus is going to address that. And I don't know about you. So when I started pursuing Jesus, I remember going to a church and they had a Wednesday night service. Now, at this Wednesday night service, I remember I would go, and it was called their prayer service. Now, when you went, they would break you up into prayer groups, and I think there was an elder that would lead each group, and we'd have a list of things that they would give us of things to pray for within the church, and we get in these circles, and then we would pray. Now, I remember I'm still kind of okay, I'm doing this, God, and there's a Wednesday night service. I'm going to be there. And so I go, and then as I sit in the circle, I look around, and then the elder's and so we're all going to pray, and who's going to pray for this or that, and we're going to go in a clockwise fashion, because that's spiritual. No. And so anyway, so I remember going, I didn't agree to pray. I agreed to attend. And some of you have found yourself in the midst of a prayer circle, and you were afraid, and you were like, well, what happens? And so anyway, so I'm in the circle sitting there, and I am scared out of my mind, because I am not trained to pray in a professional manner yet. And so as they start praying, now it's very intimidating, because some people get a whole bunch of amens when they pray, some get nothing, and so you're just listening and you're watching, and more you're building up man, what am I gonna say? It's getting closer. I gotta get some amens out of this. I gotta cause them to think that I know a lot and that I'm not new. And so I literally remember say something about maybe mountains and water. That's all they sing about. So that's, so I prayed, and as I prayed, I remember just almost trying to pray in the King James Version. And it was it probably didn't make sense, and they're probably who is this guy? But I was really trying to look the part. I really wanted them to think, I belong here, I'm spiritual, I've been doing this, and I study my Bible and know it, and me and God are like this. And so I was really concerned that they would believe and think about me a certain way. Now, in Jesus' day, he is going to address this topic of prayer with the Jews. He's speaking to this Jewish audience, and he's going into the hypocrisy that had come in with prayer. And what he's going to do, he's going to contrast prayer done publicly to privately, wordiness or verbosity to simplicity. And so when you think about Judaism, there is no religion that has ever had a higher standard or had more of a priority with prayer than them. You look at God's chosen people, and in Romans 3:2, it speaks to the Jews as the ones entrusted with the oracles of God. So we see God spoke directly to Abraham and many of his descendants, and they had spoken directly with God. They would literally talk with God. God would speak back to them. And so of all the people who knew how to pray, these should be the people. And so what had happened is praying had become corrupted by rabbinic tradition, and most Jews at this point in time were completely confused about how to pray as God wanted them to pray. I think for some of us that's very real, and it hits home. I think we find ourselves sometimes going, man, I don't really know how I'm supposed to do this or what it's supposed to look like. And the faithful Jew would repeat this prayer called the Shema prayer, which was a combination of some of Numbers and Deuteronomy, and they would pray that every morning and every night. There was another prayer called the Shemana Esrei, which was really 18 prayers. It was called the 18. And the really devout ones would pray those 18 prayers in the morning in the afternoon and in the evening. I mean, they were legit. And they would do this at appointed times. They would stop whatever they were doing, typically at 9, 12, and 3 p.m., and they would just stop and pray. They had developed prescribed prayers for every occasion. Like it's sunny out, we have our prayer for that. They would have it for every type of occasion. And prayer was very limited to these specific times and specific occasions. And so Jesus addresses this hypocrisy with prayer and brings how it needs to change. So in Matthew 6:5, he says this, "And when you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, that they may be seen by others. Truly, I say to you, they have received their reward." So, Jews over time have been influenced by many things. The worst was wanting to be seen and heard by other people. What is that at its core? It's pride. It's pride, right? The motive for prayer was for self-glory. And Jesus addresses this in John 14:13. He speaks to this. He says in John 14:13, he says, "Whatever you ask in my name, this I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son." So when it comes to prayer, it's about him and he's the point. He's the point. He's the purpose of prayer. And so this term, this hypocrite, this word, it originally referred to actors who would use large masks to portray their character that they were acting. So what hypocrites would do or say didn't necessarily represent who they were or what they were about. And we all, at points in times, are hypocrites. And so this old commentator observed that the greatest danger to religion is that the old self simply becomes religious. This is a very interesting thought. I want you to think about that because I think a lot of us, when we came to Jesus, a relationship with Jesus, or we started to process through if I have a relationship with Jesus, we identified this old way of doing things, this old list of priorities, or maybe it was just something that was really jacked up or very sinful that you were involved in, and you were like, I need to turn from that and go in a different direction. And one of the things that's so interesting about this is for some of us, that old life, it's not necessarily that we struggle with the particular same things before, but that old self has now become religion. And so our old self, what we actually revert to is this religiosity, this ritualistic relationship, and our identity becomes this, and what was so pure and right has now crept back into our old self, but our old self really now is religion. And I want you to think for a moment, if you were Satan and you wanted to distort and wreck what God was doing, what would you do? You would attack the communication between God and humanity. Right? I want you to think about that. Like think about, some of you are married, some of you are in like a dating relationship, and think about how many fights you have that at their core came back to miscommunication. It's overwhelming. Well, you said you'd pick them up. Well, you said you would be there. Well, you said you would call them. Or I thought we were going to go to my parents' house for the holidays this year. Like communication at its core is something that we struggle with. So if you were the enemy, if you were Satan, what would you attack? The communication between us and God. When you look at Jesus, his life, and the most intense times of just spiritual opposition that he faced, what were they? One was when he was out in the wilderness fasting for 40 days. And the other is when he's in the Garden of Gethsemane and he's there. What's the common denominator with both those times? He had set himself, he was away, and he was by himself talking to his Father. And so I want you to just know that the reality is Satan is going to try and attack your prayer life. Your ability to communicate with God. He wants to distort God's voice in your life. He wants to distort how you talk to him. He wants to wreck that because we know what we're supposed to do from talking with God. That's what he's after. So the stakes are high for us. It's a big deal that we understand and know this. When he talks about standing, standing was a normal position of prayer for Jews. In the Old Testament, we see kneeling, lying prostrate, and standing. And in the New Testament, we see that the most common position was standing. The synagogue was an appropriate place to pray for public prayers. It was the place Jews worship most often. And Jesus isn't saying, don't pray there publicly. He's not saying that. But it's interesting here in the Greek word for street, which street is also used in verse 2 of chapter 6. It's a different word, actually, and it actually refers to a wide or a major street. In other words, they were planning to be in a place where the most people would be. They were trying to find the largest audience, and those are the places they were trying to go and pray. So there's a big street corner. Oh, that's a good spot. And they would park themselves there, and in front of everyone, they would start to pray. And they want to be seen, they want to be noticed, as big an audience as possible. That was the goal. And so this motive that they had was they wanted people to see them. They wanted to be acknowledged, and they wanted people not only to see them, but they also wanted people to know how righteous they were. It's interesting, in Luke 18:11, Jesus is actually speaking a parable. And as he's speaking the parable, he actually goes through what a prayer would be like for a Pharisee. And he says it. And in Luke 18:11, he says this. The Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I mean, I want you to think about, like, that's how they're praying. And they're not just like praying that in their room and like they're praying in public, biggest audience as possible. They want to be acknowledged. They want to be known. And just like Jesus says in Matthew 6:2, their reward is full. Now, what he's not saying, I am just rewarding them for this. This is how you do it. Like, no, they're concerned about the rewards of man, the acknowledgement of other people. And he says, in that way, they're full. They feel rewarded. They feel blessed. And I think there's a huge danger to this that we struggle with. Because we struggle with sometimes how we feel about ourselves is actually a direct result of how other people feel about us. We examine and analyze how spiritual we are by how spiritual people think we are. And so a lot of times we're like, man, I feel close to God because people think I'm close to God. And it makes me feel good about myself. And so I must be close to him. It's interesting how quickly that becomes distorted. When I was in San Diego at a very large church, there was 20-some of us pastors, and we would get together and meet. And I remember when we would get together and meet, and this one time, as we're all meeting in this room, and the lead pastor comes in, and he starts talking, and then he asked me to like stand up, and I was like, and he just started acknowledging something that I had done or been a part of, and I remember just like it was like a moment, right? Like I'm in front of my peers. I'm like, and I remember walking out of that, and it was like a big office complex, and it was big enough to where there was a big loop, and so I made the full loop. It just, hey guys, hey, yeah, I don't know if you heard what happened in there, but yeah, I know, that was me. God worked through me. And so anyway, and I remember going into my office and just feeling just great. And I sat there for a minute, and it was just very, very clear. God was like, your relationship with me is awful. And right now, it's pretty non-existent. I remember sitting there and just thinking, like, why in the world was I so happy and so proud of where I was at with God when in reality I wasn't with God at all? Because I was experiencing the praise from other people. See, how they thought I was, that made me feel like I was what they thought I was, but I wasn't. And many, many times, we very, very quickly cross this line where it's really not about where we're actually at with God. It's how other people perceive or think we are with God, and that makes us feel like we are right with God. And many times, it's far from it. Many times we find ourselves in these situations like wanting to be noticed, wanting to sound good, wanting other people to acknowledge us, and it has nothing to do with God. It's got everything to do with the jacked up pride in me. And so I experienced that. And I think some of us, we become off base so quickly. We can fool people so easily. But here's what's dangerous, you guys. You can fool yourself very easily. You can literally tell yourself something, reinforce it to yourself, and it may not be true, but because you keep reinforcing it, you start to believe it. And it's dangerous. That's why hiring people is so hard. That's why premarital is so important. You want to find out who the person really is. God's concerned with our hearts. That's what he's concerned with. I want to encourage some of you right now that struggle with this. God is concerned with your heart. Let's stop trying to make it about all these other things. And then in Matthew 6:6, he says this. He says, "But when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you." So prayer is this fellowship, right, that we have with God. It's all about him. It was his idea. And I want you to just think, there would be no prayer if he didn't desire for prayer to be. Okay, so prayer, what's so amazing about it is God has designed and desired to have communication with you and me. Now, we didn't earn it. We didn't deserve it. He didn't look down and go, "Oh my goodness, that person is so special. I don't know how I did that. I really want to talk to them." No, he did that because he's God and he loves us at a level we can't comprehend. And here's the thing. If he didn't tell us how to pray, how would we know how to pray? So he says this. It's important to notice this. He says, when you pray. He says, when you pray. So he's not saying you have to pray at this time and this time and this time. He says, when you pray. And he talks about this in some translations, this inner room, or your room as it says in the ESV. Such rooms, they had these rooms in these houses, and these rooms were often secret and used to store valuable possessions, for protection. Many times it was the only place that was locked. And so he's literally saying, go into the most secret, private place you can that's available and go there. And he's telling this crowd this. He's not condemning public prayer. In fact, Jesus prayed publicly many times. What he's doing is contrasting how the hypocritical religionists were doing it. It's not about location, but attitude. Going to a place that will remove temptation. Shut the door and concentrate on God and pray to your Father. Do whatever you have to do to get the attention off you. Whenever I'm going to have a very special or deep or important conversation with someone. Now, my kids are just at the age where the respect, dad's on the telephone, it just doesn't even process. And so they just, and I'm one of those that already when I'm on the phone, I just start walking. Some of you are wanderers as well. I just start walking. And anyway, and so, but I keep wandering around when I'm on the phone if it's an important call because they keep following me, and I just want to speak in quiet and focus, and so I'll end up going through the whole house, and I end up in the garage every time. Garage, it's the one door we have that's got that special child lock on it that they haven't figured out yet. And so I go in there, and I have to purposefully remove distraction and things that take the focus off of the individual that I'm communicating with. And so for some of us, we have to physically find a place where it removes the distractions, and for some of us, it removes our own personal agenda. So I have to find a place where as I approach God, it is not, "Hey God, let me bring to you me." It's more like, "Hey God, I want to talk to you because you're God. And I don't want to have any of this to mess with, one, what you maybe want to talk to me about, but two, what you maybe want to expose and change in me." And so this is something like Jesus, when you look at him, he regularly went away from his disciples to pray. Those are the times when you see who you really are and who you aren't. Like who you really are and aren't isn't a reflection of how you pray in here, how you worship in here, how you respond or not respond, or how many things you serve at here. Like that's not the reflection. It's who you are in the stillness, in the quietness with God. That's who you are. The secret he sees is not the words out of our mouths, but what's in our hearts. And he doesn't say what the reward is, but he says he will bless those who come to him in sincerity. Like whenever there's a reward in the Bible, I immediately take that and I start putting together what I think it should be. And God, like if you're gonna reward, like this is where I'm at, this is what you could do, just an idea, and like that's happening, or I'm praying about that, and so God, why don't you reward me in this way? It would probably work out best that way. And here's the thing I am so thankful for, because I have no idea what I really need and what's best for me and my family. And I am so thankful that his rewards are with his currency, not mine. His rewards are the eternal, the transformational things that he wants to do and bring into your life as a result of you seeking him out with sincerity of heart, with the authenticity of who you are. I was in San Diego when I had planted a church. We would have these community groups that would start. And when a community group would start, I would go and attend the community group, and I would tell them, invite the neighbors and all that, and I would come and answer questions, kind of cast vision and all that. And I'll never forget, I went to this community group, and this couple was hosting it, and his parents had come from South Korea, very, very poor, had started this dry cleaning business and so he actually had them move in with him and was helping them, this couple was, and just loving their parents well. And I'll never forget, after everyone had left, he goes, Steve, you got to come here. And I go, what? And he takes me around the house, and they had their stairway, and behind the stairs, below the stairs, was this little door. And he opens it up. And I look in, and there's nothing. And then he turns on this light. And way back, tucked away in there, is this little spot that his mom had made with this little pillow, her Bible, her journal, this little lamp. And he goes, my mom is there every morning and every night. And I just went, man. Like what a message that mom is sending. Not by how vocal she is to her kids. Not by her like waking them all up. Let's pray, la 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 la. It's just like, but like I'm like, why don't you want to pray, son? Like, come on. Like, and here is this lady modeling to her grown-up kids about the reality of an authentic relationship with God. She wasn't parading it around. She was just modeling in the quietness, in the stillness of this room that no one would even know existed. And that's where she met with Jesus every day. And I think that's the heart of what Jesus is saying. This isn't about show. This isn't about ritualistic things. This isn't about a religion. This is bringing you back to the heart of why I came, why I'm here, and what this could be with us. But you got to bring it from the heart. I'm after authenticity. I'm after the core of who you are. And he keeps going in Matthew 6:7. He says, and when you pray, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. Now, Jesus is singling out the meaningless words and this length of prayers. In the Greek, it refers to idle, thoughtless chatter. And the Jews had picked up on this from the Gentiles, and so because the Gentiles believed that the value of a prayer was largely a matter of quantity. And this repetition was patterned after pagan religions back in those days. The interesting piece about this is I look at that and I think about things that I do that are prayers that are very, to be honest, thoughtless. My heart's not in it. And I think about, man, how many times before a meal have I prayed to pray? It has nothing to do with what's in front of me. It could be Taco Bell or King's Estate. Like has nothing to do with that. It's literally just the same prayer. Now, and when I'm praying that, whether it's at a restaurant, at home, I wonder and I question, am I directly trying to reach out to God right now? Or am I just saying, this is what we do? And it's something that honestly, like I think about that and it really convicts me and it exposes me about how quickly something that can be just something you do. Do you think the Jews were like, hey, we want to have a hypocrisy, like prayer relationship with God? Do you think they just said that and sought down that path? No, it happens so quickly and subtly in our lives. And Jesus did not forbid repetition in prayers. I want to say that too. In fact, he was repetitious at times. In Luke 18, 2 through 7, there's a couple situations that are really powerful where he demonstrates, one, that he actually was repetitious. In Luke 18, verse 2, it says this, and he's talking about this, he's given a parable again, and he's talking about this widow. And he says in verse 2, he said, in a certain city, there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected man. And there was a widow in that city who kept coming to him and saying, give me justice against my adversary. For a while he refused, but afterwards he said to himself, though I neither fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will give her justice, so that she will not beat me down by her continual coming. And the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge says. And will not God give justice to his elect who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long over them? So he responds to that, to us coming to him. In 2 Corinthians 12, 7 and 8, Paul says, I asked God 3 times, like 3, wasn't once, wasn't twice, 3 times. I repeated, please take this from me, this thorn to my side. And we see in Matthew 26, in Jesus' most intense time where you see him talking to the Father. And in Matthew 26, verses 39 through 44, it says this, he's in the garden facing the most powerful, like agonizing moment. It says, and going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, so could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, my Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done. And again, he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the 3rd time, saying the same words again. So he's not addressing repetition. He's not addressing like something that is happening in your life that's huge, and it's not one of these like, God, I'm gonna pray this, all right, let's see what happens. Like no, there's certain things in our lives that we're like, God, this is real. I'm still struggling with this. God, I don't know what to do in this situation. God, this is hard. I don't know why this happened to me. And that's not just something you throw out there and then like don't bring up again. That's important. That's your life. That's what's happening. And you see, in his most intense moments, he does repeat what's happening in his heart, in his life, and he brings that to the Father. What was happening here is this stuff was mindless. It was just ritualistic. It was spiritually sounding. It was just like a magical formula that they had. It was literally just thoughtless prayers that they just kept spewing out and saying and kept going to get like a longer prayer. And he's like, what are you doing? Like, you don't respond to any friend who talks to you like that. Like literally, you're like, how do I get them off the phone? Like, I mean, I don't know if you've ever had a friend call you and be like, you know what? Honestly, I don't know why I called you. And you're like, okay, well, thanks for calling me. Goodbye. You know, like we want meaningful conversations with people. But it's crazy, but hey, a relationship with God, the Almighty, the Creator, the one who made me, who shaped and formed me and gave me hope and life and purpose. Hey, God, I just want to spew off some stuff so we're good. They were esteeming long prayers, believing its importance and effectiveness was in direct connection to its length. And Jesus warned about this in Mark 12:40. Jesus talks about this. He says this in Mark 12:40. He says, and he's talking about beware of these scribes. And he says in verse 40, who devour widows' houses and for a pretense make long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation. Like, don't do this. Don't do that. And then in Matthew 6:8, he says this, do not be like them. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. God doesn't have to be annoyed or continually reminded. Martin Luther said, by our praying, we are instructing ourselves more than we are him. Prayer is sharing the needs, the burdens, the hunger of our hearts before God. He wants to hear us, fellowship with us. And here's the reality. I think sometimes I struggle praying or focusing or sometimes just being real and authentic with him. And I understand sometimes why. You know why? Because he loves me way more than I love him. And that's a hard pill to swallow sometimes. But I tell you what he has done and offered you, sending his only son to come and to die and to bridge a gap between himself and you, to pay for all the penalty of your past, present, future sins, like that's how he loves you. And yet because I don't love him back like that, I struggle just to talk to him sometimes. Sometimes I just go, man, did I even talk to him this week? During the day, but God, my day's busy. Don't you see that? And we're surprised, why don't we respond how we wish we would? And I think for some of us, it just comes back to an understanding and going back to that place of realizing why he loved you in the first place and how his love played out for you. And those are the things that we respond to. And I think we just miss the point of prayer and how he looks at prayer for us and with us and what he wants to do in prayer. There was a couple situations that just stand out to me in moments where I just see God's heart in prayer. In Daniel 10:12, Daniel is before the Lord and he responds in Daniel 10:12, and it says this, then he said to me, fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and humbled yourself before your God, your words have been heard. And I have come because of your words. I have heard you. I'm responding to your words. Guys, that's how this real and authentic relationship with God works. That's how he looks at it with us. Another situation in Acts 10:31, there's this centurion, this very important guy named Cornelius, and he's not a Jew. He doesn't have a relationship with Jesus, but he was praying to God, giving towards God, believed in God. In Acts 10:31, it says this, and he said, Cornelius, your prayer has been heard, and your alms have been remembered before God. And the gospel went to the Gentiles. He sent Peter. He responds. When you cry to him, when you're in the depths of the reality of your heart and you take that to him, that's what he's after. That's what he's waiting for. That's when your relationship crosses that bridge. And for some of us, it's a recrossing of the bridge. Pray with a devout heart, with pure motives. Pray with a single attention. Pray with confidence. When I read those things, you guys, I come away praying confidently. They're not just okay, God, let's see what happens. I threw it out there. No, he's not a slot machine. You don't put the coin in and go, I wonder what's going to happen. No, that's not the relationship with God. That's not what it's about. He wants you to pray with confidence. And for some of you right now, I just want you to think about that moment when you had the closest time of prayer with him, the closest interaction that you've ever experienced with him. I want you to think about that time, that moment when you talked to him in a way that maybe you've never talked to him since. I want you to think about what came out of your mouth. I want you to think about how it sounded. I want you to think about the things you said, because I would bet, like myself, your prayer was not impressive. Your prayer was not something people at church were like, wow, they got it together. No, the closest moments and interactions I've had with God is God, I don't know what you're doing. I'm confused. I'm hurt. I don't know why this happened to me. God, I'm experiencing something. I don't know what to do. God, you know me. You designed me. I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. God, how do I handle this situation? God, what do I do? This happened to me. I lost my job. I lost my family. God, what am I going to do? And I cry out to him, and I don't care in those moments who's listening, what it's about, how righteous I sound. I just know that I need God. I need God. And for some of us, for whatever reason, that prayer, that maybe it was the initial prayer, that initial experience of love, when you realized it and you came to him with that purity and you didn't care for whatever reason, that has turned religious and ritualistic. And it's no longer what it was. I want to challenge you this morning to get back to that place with him. Do you remember how that felt? Do you remember what that was like? And maybe you've never experienced that. That's what it's like. He transforms and changes your life. You know, we can be so insecure in how we view ourselves and how we deal with people. And I find more and more that we take those insecurities in how we approach God. Guys, he designed you. He made you. He knows you. Be the you he designed you to be and approach him like that. It doesn't matter what all these other people are thinking about you. Listen, every time I speak somewhere and teach, I struggle with this because I go, man, I wonder how that sounds. I wonder what they'll think about this. I wonder if this will be impressive. And I have to continually just go, Steve, no, stop it. Like, stop it. I've designed you a specific way. You do that. You be how I designed you to be. That's where I'll meet you at. And for some of us, we need to hear that. We need to go back to the place of, I want you because without you, I am nothing. Where is that? You know, at this high school camp, I was speaking at last week, towards the end of the camp, most of the leaders at the camp, they find themselves just at this pool because it's like the spot where all these high schoolers are doing everything and all that. And so we were there as leaders, and I was just there to speak. And I remember looking around and I said, hey, we should start a competition and age brackets, and we should see who can go underwater the longest down or back, because the lifeguard was bored, and so I said, let's just see what happens, and we had age groups, and I was in the 35 and up, and felt confident, and so we started doing this, and we started going back and forth, and I don't know if you've ever swam underwater. I've talked too much. Swam underwater, but when you swim underwater, like it's amazing, isn't it? How we like it's like a force that you're trying to push away, right? Like underwater, you're trying to literally move it out of the way so that you can keep going, so that you can like push through, and you're literally trying to physically with your arms like push through the water so it parts for you. And I was thinking about that, man, my prayer life with God needs to look like that. Like I need to bring it back to this. Because I find too often, it's like this. And I want to bring it back to that place where we're like, no, I know this is real. I know this is even me right now. I know this is agendas. I know this is what's happened to me. This is how I feel. But God, I need to push that away, aside, out of the way, because I just want you again. I just want to talk to you again. I don't want to be thinking about all these things. I don't want this stuff to mess with what you have for me. And I want to encourage you guys to fight for that. I want to close with these verses. I just want, and to be honest, I just want you to listen to these verses. These verses always bring me back to the core of prayer and approaching God and talking to him. In Hebrews 4, verse 14, it says this, and I just want you to listen. It says, since then, we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then, with confidence, draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. I love that picture of approaching this throne of grace. And some of us need to reapproach the throne of grace this morning with where we're at, or maybe where we're not at. But we need to fight and get back to the heart of our relationship with Jesus. And we need to bring back that authenticity, that realness that you had with him. And I want to invite you to do that today. Let me pray for us.